What do you see as the key campaign messages from either side? Let's start with Daniel Andrews. Presumably his argument is that, Victoria's done all right, I've been a strong leader, stick with me and we'll fix hospitals and transport.
Look, I think it's, essentially I'm a safer pair of hands than the other mob, I suppose, from Daniel Andrews. And I think it's been interesting. I think there was an advertisement that the CFMEU put out last week. I don't know whether you saw it, Chris, but to me, in a lot of ways, I think it kind of summed up the position that's Victoria's in. They said, I'm not sure whether I'm allowed to use this word, but that their ad said, Dan might be a prick, but he's building $30 billion worth of infrastructure. He's spending however many billion dollars on this and that, and it'll keep us in jobs for 30 years. Because the reality,
I've played footy with a few guys like that. I've played footy with a few pricks, but you want them rather them on your side than the other side.
Yeah, he may be a prick, but he's our prick, I suppose, is the message. And I suppose the other thing I was going to say when we were talking about Teals before is that there is some diversity in, or not so much Teals as a crossbench and independent candidates. There are parts of the outer suburbs that have traditionally been very safe Labor seats that are perceived as having been neglected by Labor for a considerable period, where there are independents who may be in with a shot, who are, genuinely separate. They're not sort of part of Climate 200. They're genuinely independents. So it will be interesting to see how some of those candidates do in seats like Melton and Point Cook, for example.
Well, let's look at the Liberal side and the Liberal message. Of course, they've had trouble finding strong leadership over the time, and they've had leadership changes. Matthew Guy's in the seat now. I think we've got some pictures of the ditch Danmobile, an ambulance that they've been using as a campaign ploy today, as suggestions that it might be against the law to actually have a fake ambulance. I think that's a bit of froth and bubble, but it obviously shows they want to focus on health, and that's of course linked to pandemic management as well. How strong is this argument for them, do you think?
Look, I think there's no doubt that Victoria's hospital system is in crisis, and that message, and people are feeling that every day. I think the question is whether or not the coalition can convince people that they would actually do a better job. And I think the other aspect of it that is interesting is Matthew Guy wants to make this quite rightly call the government out in terms of the problems with their health policy. But meanwhile, Daniel Andrews is running his campaign out of the Australian Nursing and Midwifery Federation's headquarters, the Nurses Union headquarters. So that's also an interesting dynamic.
It sure is. These big public sector unions are now very, very important for Labor, and you hear a lot of them during the campaign. Thanks for that, Rachel. We'll keep tabs on it over the next few weeks.
Thanks, Chris. Rachel
Baxendale there. You can read her reporting and analysis of the election campaign in the Australian newspaper. I just want to show you a cartoon from Mark Knight in the Herald Sun from yesterday, I think it was. And this is Dan Andrews using taxpayers' money, of course, to sponsor the Australian Diamonds netball team. And he's got them in the Victoria deficit blowout. That's for C, the gold offence. Victoria, the pothole capital, and the health system in crisis. Victoria, 000 chaos, and Dan's longest lockdown. I don't think we're going to see those slogans on our netballers, even though they would be perhaps a bit more truthful than some of the spin we're getting from Labor and Daniel Andrews. I can't believe that Victorians have had that done to them by a government and that they're going to return them. Never mind what the alternative is like. It's going to be a verdict on the government, the most locked down city in the world.